presentation. We are going to move on to the next presenter fairly quickly without break. So our next presenter is Grant Statham. Unlike many other presenters who offered an extensive bio, Grant humbly submitted a bio that reads Visitor Safety Specialist Parks Canada. If you know Grant, you know that's a very small snippet of a very long and distinguished career. Grant's had his fingerprints on a variety of efforts, both in Parks Canada with the 8 scale, certainly with the the North American Danger Scale, a variety of other efforts, including the technical aspects of snow avalanche risk assessment, the TSARM document by the CAA. So Grant, shame on you for being so humble, but thank you very much for joining us today. And Grant, I pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I'll do a check here. Can you see the screen and hear my voice okay?
I can hear your voice good, and your screen is on your last slide.
Last slide, okay. Update to the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale with a picture. Should be the first slide that's on my screen. Is that what you got?
You just need to scroll to the beginning. There you go. Now you got to go to present mode.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in all that, so it must be just moving slow. So just stop me if it looks weird, because I think my screen is different than the one they do with a lag here, but I'll begin. So thanks for having me here. And thanks to the CAA, you guys, for organizing this. I think it's great that you pulled this off in the midst of the pandemic, and everyone, good to connect. I feel like after Bruce's talk, I could redo my entire talk here. Actually, I had so many thoughts, having worked on lots of systems over the years, including this one. This is kind of an ironic follow to what Bruce was just talking about, because so much of what he said would apply to this. I want to talk to you about, obviously, the update work to the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale. I've been working on this. I've had this idea that this needed to be done for probably 5 years. I've had the chance to start working on it about 18 months ago. And then it really picked up a bit of speed this winter. And I've got to say the pandemic and the isolation has allowed me to really make some movement on it. So I just want to tell you about it today. It's not finished. This is draft work, but I thought you might be interested to see what we're doing. So I'll start with this. This is the original first edition of the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale 8. We published it with Parks Canada originally in 2004. I think everybody probably knows it, so I won't spend much time here, but it has 3 levels: simple, challenging, and complex, and then a description here. This is something that I would say is built for the source or for the receiver. This was we call it the communication model, but Bruce's terms are well placed here. But that wasn't enough for a lot of people when we started that, so we had to build something for the source as well. So this is the technical details that that inform that rating, and I think you've all seen this before. Has the parameters on the left, and then it breaks it apart into the pieces according to simple, challenging, and complex. So we first did that in 2004, which is 16 years ago at Parks Canada. We followed that up by producing ratings for trips and climbs and specific destinations inside the park. So I show you these 2 brochures. The one on the left is for basically ski touring. The one on the right is ice climbing. We've published 4 editions of the brochure on the left and 2 editions of the one on the right. Each time we make modifications and adjust our ratings. And this is just an example of what the ratings look like. We haven't changed our method since then. And I'm about to tell you about other work that's going on around us that is really good work, and we're hoping to move towards a mapping product into the future here. So feeling like our original work is a little dated and time to kind of move ahead. So to just sort of introduce the way that a lot of people are doing the work these days is I'll just talk about the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale zoning method, which Cam Campbell and Brian Gould and I think James Newby put together first in 2012. So I show you a screen here. This is a simplification of the original scale, and their idea here was to build it to be more applicable for GIS and more quantitative terms. Instead of using things like generally less than 30 degrees, we went for more specific numbers in here, and forest densities. You'll see they added a class 0, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. That's an important addition, and you'll see in here, this is the key piece, or one of the key pieces here of this model, is they specifically broke this apart in terms of slope angle distribution, and that allows a GIS system to rate a lot, or do the first phase of the rating. So a key thing here is how the CAM has applied these ratings. Whereas I described to you, we did specific trips in the national parks. These ratings were applied, and Avalanche Canada has done it this way, to zones within entire areas. So the whole area gets rated, not a specific trip, but the whole place. So that includes spots where people may or may not go. Doesn't really have a specific destination on there. And that's a significant difference from how the trip version that we had is done. So this is an example of a zone map that Avalanche Canada has produced. I believe this is for the gorge just west of Revelstoke. And you can just see how it looks pretty straightforward. There's green is simple, blue is challenging, and black is complex terrain, and it kind of lays it out for people. There's been a lot of other work done all over the place with regards to mapping. Norway's done some amazing mapping. Spain has done some great mapping. There's lots of good examples of this. And so mapping eights is sort of a modern way to show it. But one thing that's always bothered me, of course, it's been 16 years, there's always been some issues with eights, and I just want to highlight 3 of the main ones that we want to rectify with this version 2. The first one, you saw it before, is we have simple terrain, and simple terrain was originally built because we were too uncomfortable to create class 0 non-avalanche terrain. We tried originally, but it was such a new concept in the beginning that I think the idea of saying that avalanches never happen here just was too much to handle in the beginning. So we called it simple, and simple terrain is barely avalanche terrain. It's low angled for the most part. There's the odd opening to a runout zone, but maybe the odd creek bed, but really it's pretty low risk, but it's not non-avalanche terrain. And as I'll show you in just a minute, we really need to be able to show non-avalanche terrain. The other one was complex, and this speaks to what Bruce was just talking about. Maybe we love our love affair with higher resolution, but one of our goals originally was to have this rating system into guidebooks and people who are doing trips, so you can open up your book and take a look at the ski tour you want to do or the ice climb, and it tells you what the rating is. But the interesting thing is as soon as you go out and start real ski touring, every trip is complex terrain. It's just not a high enough resolution at the high end here to really make this of much value to people who are experienced, because all their time is spent in complex terrain. And the third thing is the idea of glaciation. You can see here we had glaciation in every level, and it was a bone of contention right from the beginning. And I do have to admit, it's obviously not one of the key inputs into avalanche formation, etc. It has a role to some degree, but I definitely buy that we need to pull that. So we're going to remove the glaciation parameter as well. And I just want to give you a couple examples of why we need to do some of these things. First of all, class 0. This is Lake Louise. This is a shot from Google Earth with all of our Parks Canada trails around there. One thing, like we call all of these simple at the moment, but that has no avalanche terrain on it, none. There's nothing that can get you on those trails from an avalanche. And we have millions of people here into the visitor center who want to know where they can go snowshoeing and skiing, and they don't want to even think about avalanches. And we have had to do a lot of work to produce brochures and make signs and do all these things just to say where the avalanches don't occur 100%. So class 0 will be really helpful for us and for our visitor center staff. And just, I don't know how much we'll use this, but just looking, this is a picture from Beau Summit looking out across the road, but that's a big wide valley with lots of meadow and flats. There's obviously lots of places there where people could move around and not be anywhere near avalanche terrain. So I think there is an awful lot of value in doing that. It's controversial to do it. It's difficult, as you'll see in just a minute here, because we can't be wrong. We're going to call it non-avalanche terrain. We have to be 100% certain. So. The next one is class 4. So this is extreme terrain is what we're going to call this. I put this picture up just as a good example of what that terrain looks like. Again, this is our next level up. Bruce referred to it the other day. I was telling him about this. He said, you're talking about tiger country. And I think that's probably a pretty good analogy. Next level up from complex terrain. The term itself, that's a commonly used term, at least in the world that I've worked in. We would often talk about things happening in extreme terrain. You'll notice here, this is from the danger scale. It talks about isolated areas and extreme terrain. We want to use terminology that we're familiar with. This is an example. I showed this last year at the CAA meetings, but this is places where we're rescuing people, not regularly. The Granddaddy on the left, we get several calls a year to that. Like, there's people all over this stuff these days in the park. This is an example, Connaught Creek, people looking across at Mount Cheops. you would recognize in the middle of this, that's the STS couloir, if you can see my mouse there. That typically would have been all complex, but if you apply a higher filter to it, you're going to find extreme terrain, which is the steep, gnarly tiger country in this kind of places. And like I said, there's people all over this stuff. There's people climbing the ridges, dropping couloirs, skiing that stuff. So it really does break apart quite differently than complex terrain. And the last one for us in Banff Park and Jasper is going to be all the waterfall climbing routes we have. This one's Polar Circus, but there's so many places where we have frequent regular avalanches and people are exposed to them. So it's, you know, like what you're looking at here is obviously an order of magnitude higher than a steep ski tour in terms of avalanche risk. So we want to be able to show that through the terrain ratings. So this is the new system that we're proposing. Again, like I say, it's not finished, but class 0 is non-avalanche terrain and no known exposure to avalanches. And class 4 is extreme terrain. You'll see the rating there, or the description. Exposure to very steep faces with cliffs, spines, couloirs, crevasses, or sustained overhead hazard. Even small avalanches can be fatal with no options to reduce exposure. So this is actually the, for the receiver, all this stuff. This is what the message we want people to get about the rating. The colors we haven't decided. We're going to have to make some changes to the colors because complex and extreme, whether they're red or black, so we're still working on that. So these colors aren't finalized yet. Here's what it looks like on the breakout. Now here we start talking about stuff that happens at source, I guess, as Bruce would say. Again, all under, this is still work in progress, but non-avalanche terrain, you can see the various parameters we're working on over there. And over here, same sort of thing, trying to break it out. One of the important parts to note in extreme terrain is the frequency magnitude here, where you'll see at approximately 10 to 1 for up to an equal size 2. So, but what we're trying to say is in this terrain, there's lots of avalanches that happen, small ones, but there's lots. And this is the third piece. So this comes from the zoning model that Cam and crew put together. These parameters, we want to introduce these into the update as well, because these are really important for the GIS-based AITS mapping. So you can program this stuff into your Google Earth or into your system, and it'll essentially drop this on there. So we want to get this in there as well. I want to quickly show you something here, a little bit of the work, and then I'm almost wrapped here. We're doing to further this work a little bit and check some of the parameters. We're doing some test mapping in combination with Avalanche Canada and a few others right now. And I just want to give you an example here. So this is Bow Summit. I guess you can see my screen, or if you haven't, you will in just a second. So what we're doing is we're doing some comparative mapping. We're getting 2 or 3 different people to map these different places out using the techniques of their own organization. Then we're going to compare them to make sure that we have good repeatability at source. Hey, Bruce, I'm a quick learner. I like that. So what we'll do, for example, is us at Bow Summit, we can roll right in here to Bow Summit. We can mark different spots on our field checks. We can put slope angle on there and check it. We can go put the contours on there, which just bring it to life. And then, as you can see, we're slowly but surely, I'm showing you some of these. We are working on putting different kinds of polygons on here, which will ultimately lead to the rating. Let me get back to here. Sorry, lost myself there. So the reason I want the mapping comparison I just talked about, we want to compare the different techniques between the people who map for AbCan and the mapping we're doing at Parks Canada, and they're done slightly differently, so we want to check the consistency. We also want to compare our mapping with what's emerging as the automated AITS mapping, and that's a whole different presentation, but there's been a lot of work done in the United States and in Norway on producing automated ways of mapping AITS. And so what we want to do is check that against manual mapping that we would do in the park, where we're really familiar with the terrain, and see how accurate the automated is and how they compare. And the last thing is we want to check those slope characteristics. I showed you those parameters, the specific slope parameters from Cam's model. By mapping the terrain accurately, somewhat small scale with local knowledge, we want to use the GIS to extract those parameters and check them and just see how consistent what's being used in the zoning model is against how our polygons might look in our park anyway. Ultimately, all these things have to land here. And I do say this because we have this model here. We have a more technical model, which we're now calling the descriptive model. We have the even more specific parameters for slope angle, All those specific parameters are trying to feed this, what you're looking at on the screen. This is the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale, and this is what communicates to the public. All the rest of the technical details behind it are our ways of trying to justify and explain what this is. So we want to check all that stuff and make sure that it feeds back to this, because this is the main message that I believe is useful to the receiver. So our goal is to complete the mapping testing this summer, finish the revisions to this model, and then we'd like to publish this in a paper by next winter. And after that, we would call the revision finished, and then we'll see what kind of uptake it gets. I know for Parks Canada, after that's done, we hope to look at moving our mapping towards, away from those brochures and onto more polygons and map-based stuff. And that's pretty much it. I'd like to say thank you to a few groups here because I've had a lot of help with this. First of all, Carl Klassen helped me get set up with a working group, which is comprised of John Sykes from Simon Fraser, Havard Larson, and a number of others from Norway have been participating. Jordi Hendricks from Montana State, along with Carl and Cam from AvCan. That's super helpful to have that working group. Also have all our staff in Parks Canada Visitor Safety, Mark and Alex, Chris, Mike, and Danielle. We've all been working on the specific mapping together and doing field trips and trying to make these as best as we can. And then another resource I feel very fortunate to have is all our GIS staff, Nicole, Josh, Ben, and Melissa in the different parks. We have a tremendous amount of resources at our fingertips for this work. So that's basically the update. My email is there. I love feedback on this stuff. One of the reasons I like to do these talks at the spring meetings is to get feedback. So if you have thoughts and you don't have time here for a question or anything, please email me, or I'd love to hear what you think. Positive, negative, anything always helps. Well, thanks very much. That's it.
Great, Grant. Well, thank you very much. I don't know whether to be more amazed by the fact folks, if you finally got Class 0 into the system, or the fact you've got us on time on our schedule. Both are awesome. Thank you very much. I suspect we have questions about this. I'll turn it over to Brent to see if we have any questions from attendees.
We currently have one question from the floor, James Floyer.
Hi, Grant. This is great. There's a lot of really good stuff, and overall, I think this is moving in a good direction. But I do have one question, and is there any concern that by adding another category at the higher end, you end up demoting some of the previously sort of mid to higher categories? So, for example, challenging now may seem to become 2 out of 4 as opposed to 2 out of 3, and complex maybe 3 out of 4 versus 3 out of 3. And I know that you've added a class 0 at the lower end, and I fully support that. So it is essentially a 5-point scale, or the proposed new scale would be 5-point scale. But and this is an interesting little bit of nomenclature here. By calling it class 0, do people essentially ignore it because it's non-avalanche terrain? And so even though it's a 5-point scale, it becomes essentially seen as a 4-point scale.
Okay, good questions. I think there's a couple questions in there. One is about class 0 and will people ignore it, and the other one is will adding a layer at the top end change people's perception as it bumps everything down. I would say that no one has brought up what you just did about the idea of class 4 reducing people's impact on everything else. So that's a good question. That's sort of similar to the danger rating discussions that we have. We have had the discussion that adding class 4 and highlighting that might increase traffic to that area. I mean, we have no way of knowing that, but by pointing out where the steep, gnarly stuff is, perhaps it'll have a downside of increasing traffic there. I guess I have to go back to what Bruce was talking about, and he said, when you're choosing these systems, they must first, more than anything, be useful to the receiver. And I just can only speak from our experience in the national park, but that kind of terrain would be useful to the receiver. We have a lot of people in it. And so I guess haven't thought about whether it would invalidate the other areas, but we do find that a real area where we would like to highlight the terrain. As far as class 0 being ignored because it's class 0, also haven't had that discussion. The one thing I would say is, class 0 has to be 100% class 0. So it's going to be applied, I think, in a very different way than any of the other areas. You know, I don't think you're going to see a clean line drawn between class 0 and class 3, for example. I think it's going to have lots of buffer to it and be way out in the middle. So I guess meaning that if people did choose to ignore it, then that would probably be okay, because that's the point. There is no avalanche terrain out there. And we want to be able to tell visitors to the park, you don't need a transceiver, you don't need to worry about avalanches at all. You can just take your kids and go for a cross-country ski.
Yeah,
I hope
that's
that
great.
answers your questions a bit.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Grant.
I think we have another question. Brent, can you introduce that?
Yes, we have another question from Brian Lazar.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, Grant, good to see you, at least from miles away.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm curious if it's, even if it's only internally or, you know, with your group or smaller groups, but how repeatable has this been so far? How are you and are you guys landing on the same page most of the time in assigning these ratings, or has this not yet been tried, even if informally?
Yeah, really good question. That's a key piece of this work. Can't really answer it yet because we're just starting this mapping work. So we'll probably know that a bit more by July. I just sort of gave a brief shot of that on the screen. We're keeping this stuff pretty blind. So for example, John at SFU and I think Yordi is helping them. Those guys have the automated algorithm, and they have been running comparisons against AVCAN's mapping. See, Parks Canada doesn't really have any mapping to test yet, but AVCAN has quite a bit. John's first report was there's inconsistency. So, and we don't know if that's between different mappers, different terrain. We're not sure yet, but it makes sense that there's inconsistency. So your question is a really good one, and it's a really important one to us too. So we're hoping that, you know, certainly by midsummer, we will have mapped out a few areas here where we can run some more tests, and I think I'll have a better answer for that towards the end of the summer.
Thanks, Grant.
Great question. Thanks, Brian. I don't see any other questions from the floor. Folks are certainly welcome. I think there's one. Brent, do you want to introduce that one? Oh, it went up and then it disappeared.
They were there and now they're gone.
Oh, easy come, easy go. Grant, Joe Obed here. I have a quick question. You likely have looked at these products in terms of recreationists and their recreational applicability. I know you're a big thinker and a long-term thinker. I just wonder if you or the team have thought about them in terms of the professional context at all.
Not really, I gotta say, and I guess I wonder what you mean. What do you mean specifically by the professional?
Well, I guess their rating.
Just explain that, please.
Well, I think AITS is often used in the recreational context as a communications tool, and in the professional context, the implications are different, I think, because the risk is managed in a workplace setting versus the recreationist managing their own risk. But maybe that's a question for another time and place.
No, I will answer it a little bit, just briefly, because it's a good question, and I haven't thought through, you know, the implications in the workplace. You know, we use AITS for workplace safety. I don't think too many people are going to be going into extreme terrain in their workplace. I know our group will, because we rescue people, but I think, you know, in certainly some places will be going there. People ski terrain like that at work, but it's not going to be a big use in that area. I have had comments and feedback from examiners from the ACMG that this will be helpful for them, because that's the kind of terrain they work in, you know, particularly for waterfall climbing in the winter. You know, that's basically where the time is spent, is in, you know, complex and extreme terrain. So some short feedback there, but otherwise that's about it, Joe.
Great. Well, thanks, Grant. We have no more questions, so I'll let you go, and if you can turn off your camera, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks very much.
And thanks again, Grant, for getting us on time, which was awesome. Before we move on to our next presenter, I just want to make a quick note to the audience. If you're having problems with your view or your audio, please use the tools on your screen. Depending on how you're interfacing with GoToWebinar, you may have the software or the web tools, so I can't offer specific advice. So explore those different options. Generally, our audience is doing quite well with tools, but it's hard for us to advise you because they're very specific to the different machines that you're on. So thanks for that consideration.